Imagine, if you will, a conversation taking place just 60 years in the future. Dennis and Terry are two old retired physicians standing on a street corner watching the traffic go by. They are communicating via hyperlink, one brain to another. This has been achieved by brain implants, which have been around for over 20 years. Speaking words in the future has been found to be too slow and take too much of our precious energy, only being used in less important pursuits like acting and politics, where vocal inflections are still deemed necessary to change another person's perceptions, something unneeded in hyperlink, because it's a given that everybody in the future is entitled to their own beliefs. An age of energetical enlightenment has begun, but we've got a long, long ways to go. Now, rather than wasting so much of our energy judging others or finding fault, we have begun to seek the wisdom in seeking good energy in all its forms and realize it is all around us. Some we recognize, but most we don't. And what works well for one person may not do the same for another. We have also begun to realize that the energy that we project, whether positive or negative, gets reflected back to us with equal intensity, whether we like it or not. Baby boomers, millennials, Gen X, and Gen Ys are all considered ancient history. This is now Gen N's turn. The printed media has now vanished, saving countless trees. Everyone recycles in the future because we've passed laws making it too expensive not to. National news has also fallen out of favor, having lost their objectivity and therefore credibility because they were found to be supporting their own personal political agendas. We've seen this in our own time. Political parties too have vanished, being replaced by an independent majority. Politicians now being elected on their own merits, without obsessing over their own power and not owing favors to anyone, like we've witnessed in the past.
Look, Dennis, there goes one of those motorized vehicles that we used to ride around in. Listen to that noise. What is coming out of the back end? It looks like smoke.
I believe they call that a diesel vehicle, Terry. And we used to burn chemicals called fossil fuels to power our cars, almost destroying our planet before we adopted alternative energy vehicles.
But those engines are so inefficient, Dennis. With hundreds of moving parts, all subject to breakdown, what were we thinking?
My guess, Terry, would be that it was the best we knew at the time, but now we know better. That reminds me of some of the same mistakes that I used to make in healthcare as well. I ran across an article the other day on the internet that received a 79% standardization and peer review rating from all our healthcare providers.
A 79% rating? I've never heard of one that high.
Neither had I, so I uploaded it from the cloud. And you know what I learned?
What?
100 years ago, the biggest killer of people was heart disease.
Heart disease? Really? You hardly ever hear of people dying of heart disease today.
That's because we learned that it was mostly preventable, and now do the things to prevent it from happening in the first place.
That must have been before we began to realize it's our responsibility for our own health, or be prepared for the consequences.
Yeah, like making people who decide to make poor health choices pay higher insurance premiums, which practically nobody can afford. The article I mentioned also said that doctors back then used to carve on people with sharpened instruments called scalpels to remove diseased parts.
But that is so macroscopic compared to what we do today, considering that most healing occurs on a cellular level.
It must have been the best we knew at the time. You want to know what else I learned? Chiropractic at that time wasn't even considered mainstream health care by many people.
Wait, what? You're joking, right? You mean a profession that recognizes the presence, simplicity, and necessity of our vital energy and can actually do something about it? Working from inside the person's body?
Presence, simplicity, and necessity of our vital energy. I really like that. Apparently, only 15% of the population back then used chiropractors, and it was mostly for symptoms like back or neck pain.
That's so short-sighted when it's something so positive that just about everyone can do for themselves. That would be like us only brushing the teeth that hurt.
Or waiting until you're sick before you start to exercise. Apparently, healing practitioners at that time were often directing care at patients' symptoms, using ways to treat from outside a person's body.
Sorry to interrupt, Dennis, but aren't ways to treat the body from the outside important?
Of course they are, but outside ways are only part of a much bigger picture. That was before we learned that outside ways cannot work without the body's vital energy, which is performing thousands of internal, interrelated processes all at the same time, and that introducing a potentially powerful chemical or procedure into a complex system like the body can result in a variety of responses, some of which aren't exactly desirable. The article went on to say that these outside ways doctors became so powerful that they took to blaming their patients when their methods failed. At the height of their arrogance, the American Medical Society at the time even formed a committee on quackery, whose main purpose was to eliminate the chiropractic profession. That was back in the year 1976. It took some time, but in 1987, United States District Judge Susan Getzendanner found the American Medical Association guilty of trying to destroy a healthcare competitor.
But don't pockets of resistance still remain to this day to those that are still in love with outside ways to treat the body?
Yes, the article even mentioned that there are people still to this day that believe that concept. Crazy, isn't it? They haven't yet made the transition to recognizing the importance of electricity, just like we have with our cars. One thing's for sure. Once a person begins to see their body as electric, they begin to ask different questions. I suppose it would be like asking the manufacturers of motorized vehicles before electric cars if they thought that the future of transportation would be by using the renewable energy of electrons.
Yeah, you can pretty much predict what they would say.
That's for sure. You want to know something else? Just look at how we tried to treat the body during the COVID pandemic just 60 years ago. Here we had the entire planet turned upside down, focusing on mostly outside ways, with the best and brightest people at the time working on a universal solution, and yet we couldn't come up with something that worked well for everybody. And that was just a single virus. What a great example of how outside ways react to people differently. Outside ways people to this day still can't wrap their heads around the fact that healing is still unique to each individual, and that these ways at best only assist in that process, still needing our vital energy. We must have hit our heads really hard when we fell off that turnip truck, believing that outside ways were the only way.
Ha! Good one. I guess that as long as there's a profit to be made by using these outside ways, they will always be with us. You know, I was thinking the other day that it's just too bad we can't pay other people to do the things we should be doing for our own health and get to keep those benefits.
Yes, then the richest people in the world would be the healthiest.
Exactly. And that hasn't worked out so well, has it? I guess the lesson to be learned is that we are responsible for our own healthcare choices instead of hoping someone will do it for us. Speaking of pockets of resistance, Dennis, wasn't this also about the time that we adopted that document? What was it called? That said all men are created equal?
No, Terry, that was the Declaration of Independence, and it was written another 200 years before that.
Wow. Guess some things sure take a long time to change, Dennis.
They sure do, Terry. They sure do.